The Duke of Ashworth had 3 rules for marriage, and Eleanor Hartley was about to break every single one of them. She wasn't supposed to love the children. She wasn't supposed to ask questions. And she certainly wasn't supposed to collapse in a pool of blood on the nursery floor, her body shielding 2 small figures from a shattered window, while he stood frozen in the doorway, watching his carefully constructed world fall apart. But that was exactly what happened on a bitter February morning in 1818, and nothing would ever be the same. 3 months earlier, the contract. Eleanor Hartley was 24 years old when she received the most unusual proposal of her life, and it came not from a suitor, but from a solicitor. Mr. Pemberton sat across from her in the cramped drawing room of her cousin's house in Bath, where Eleanor had lived since her father's death 2 years prior. He was a thin man with sharp eyes and the careful manner of someone who had delivered difficult news many times before. "Miss Hartley," he began, adjusting his spectacles, "I represent His Grace, the Duke of Ashworth. He has a proposition for you." Eleanor set down her teacup with deliberate care. She had heard of the Duke of Ashworth. Everyone had. Alexander Thorne, 32 years old, reclusive, wealthy beyond measure, and rumored to be as cold as the northern estates he rarely left. "What sort of proposition?" she asked, though she could already feel the weight of it settling in her stomach. Mr. Pemberton withdrew a document from his leather case. "His Grace is in need of a wife. However, the arrangement would be unconventional." "Unconventional how?" "The marriage would be in name only," he said carefully. "You would reside at Ashworth Hall. You would bear the title of Duchess, and in exchange you would provide His Grace with an heir. After the birth of a son, you would receive a generous settlement and your own property in London. You would be free to live as you wished." The words hung in the air like frost. Eleanor had known her options were limited. Her father had died leaving debts, not inheritance. Her cousin had taken her in out of duty, not affection, and made Eleanor feel the burden of her charity every single day. Marriage proposals had been scarce. She had no dowry, no connections, and at 24, she was dangerously close to being considered unmarriageable. But this, "Why me?" she asked quietly. Mr. Pemberton cleared his throat. "His Grace requires discretion above all else. You have no family to interfere, no social connections to gossip, and—" He paused. "You have a reputation for being practical, unsentimental." The word stung more than it should have. Unsentimental, as if grief and loss had made her cold rather than simply cautious. "And if I refuse? Then His Grace will find another candidate," Mr. Pemberton said simply. "But I should mention that the settlement would be £50,000, along with a fully furnished townhouse in Mayfair and an annual income of £3,000 for life." Eleanor's breath caught. £50,000. Freedom. Security. A life of her own. "I need time to consider. His Grace requires an answer within 3 days." That night, Eleanor stood at the window of her small room, looking out at the rain-soaked streets of Bath. She thought about her father, about the quiet house they'd shared, about all the dreams that had died with him. She thought about spending the rest of her life as a burden, a perpetual guest in someone else's home. And she thought about the Duke's offer. Cold, transactional, devoid of romance, but also honest. No one had ever promised her love. At least this way she would have her independence. The next morning she sent her reply. "I accept. Ashworth Hall." Ashworth Hall rose from the moors like something from a Gothic novel, all dark stone and narrow windows, surrounded by forests that seemed to press in from every side. Eleanor arrived on a gray afternoon in November, her few possessions packed into a single trunk. The Duke met her in the entrance hall. Alexander Thorne was taller than she'd expected, with dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from marble. He wore black, always black, and his eyes were the color of winter storms. Pale gray, cold, assessing. "Miss Hartley," he said, his voice deep and carefully controlled. "Welcome to Ashworth Hall." "Your Grace." Eleanor curtsied, keeping her expression neutral. He studied her for a moment, as if she were a piece of furniture he was considering purchasing. You understand the terms of our arrangement? I do. Good. Mrs. Dawson will show you to your rooms. We will marry in 3 days, quietly, in the estate chapel. After that, you will have your own suite in the east wing. I reside in the west wing. Our paths need not cross except when necessary. The word hung between them, clinical and cold. Eleanor lifted her chin. As you wish, Your Grace. Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, that she hadn't flinched. But he said nothing, only nodded curtly and walked away, his footsteps echoing through the vast, empty hall. Mrs. Dawson, the housekeeper, was a woman of perhaps 50, with steel-gray hair and a manner that suggested she had seen everything and judged most of it wanting. "This way, miss," she said, leading Eleanor up the grand staircase. The east wing was beautiful in a cold and used way. Elegant furniture, silk curtains, everything perfectly arranged and utterly lifeless. Eleanor's rooms consisted of a bedchamber, a dressing room, and a small sitting room with windows overlooking the gardens. Meals are served in the small dining room at 8, 1, and 7, Mrs. Dawson said. His Grace keeps to a strict schedule. He does not appreciate lateness. I understand. Mrs. Dawson paused at the door. His Grace values privacy above all else, Miss Hartley. There are parts of this house that are not to be disturbed. The third floor, particularly. Eleanor frowned. The third floor. The nursery wing, Mrs. Dawson said, her expression carefully blank. It has been closed for many years. His Grace has made it clear that no one is to go there without his express permission. Before Eleanor could ask why, Mrs. Dawson had already left, closing the door behind her with a soft click. Eleanor stood alone in her beautiful, cold rooms, listening to the silence of Ashworth Hall, and wondered what kind of house forbade entry to its own nursery. The wedding took place 3 days later in the estate chapel, a small stone building nearly swallowed by ivy. There were no guests, only the chaplain, Mrs. Dawson, and Mr. Pemberton as witnesses. Alexander Thorne stood at the altar in immaculate black, his expression as remote as a stranger's. Eleanor wore a simple gray silk dress. She had not wanted to pretend this was anything other than what it was. The vows were spoken quickly, mechanically. Alexander's voice never wavered. Eleanor's hands remained steady. When the chaplain pronounced them man and wife, Alexander did not kiss her. He simply took her hand, cold and formal, and led her back to the house. That evening, Eleanor dined alone. A footman explained that His Grace had business to attend to and would not be joining her. She ate in silence, the vast dining room echoing with emptiness, and wondered if this was what her life would be from now on. Endless rooms, endless silence, endlessly alone. But that night, as she lay in her new bed, unable to sleep, Eleanor heard something. Footsteps. Soft, careful footsteps in the corridor outside her door. Then voices. A man's voice. Alexander's, she was certain, low and urgent. And then, something else. Something that made her heart stop. A child's voice. High and frightened. Papa, please. Shoo. Back to bed. Quickly. Eleanor sat up, her pulse racing. She moved to the door and pressed her ear against it. But the voices had already faded, retreating up the stairs toward the third floor, the forbidden nursery. She stood there in the darkness, her mind racing. Alexander Thorne had children, hidden children, children no one was supposed to know about. And Eleanor Hartley, Duchess of Ashworth, had just married a man with secrets that could destroy them all. The discovery. Eleanor did not sleep that night. She lay awake, staring at the canopy above her bed, her mind turning over the impossibility of what she'd heard. A child's voice. Papa, please. By morning, she had convinced herself she'd imagined it. Exhaustion, nerves, the strangeness of this cold house playing tricks on her mind. But then it happened again. 3 nights after the wedding, Eleanor woke to the sound of footsteps. Not in the corridor this time, but directly above her on the 3rd floor. Light footsteps, running, then a crash quickly muffled. She lay perfectly still, listening. For a long moment, there was nothing. Then she heard Alexander's voice. sharp and controlled, though she couldn't make out the words. In the morning, Eleanor asked Mrs. Dawson about it as casually as she could manage. "I heard something last night, on the floor above. I thought the third floor was closed." Mrs. Dawson's expression shuddered immediately. "Old houses make strange sounds, Your Grace. The wind, the settling of the structure. Nothing to concern yourself with." It sounded like footsteps. "I'm certain it was nothing." Mrs. Dawson's tone made it clear the subject was closed. "Will there be anything else?" Eleanor wanted to press, but something in the housekeeper's face stopped her. Not hostility, but something else. Fear? Or perhaps loyalty so absolute it looked like fear. "No," Eleanor said quietly. "That will be all." She spent the next week trying to follow the rules. She kept to her wing. She attended meals alone. She walked the gardens when the weather permitted, always careful not to stray toward the paths that led to the north side of the house. She saw Alexander exactly 3 times. Once at dinner, where he asked her with painful politeness if her rooms were comfortable. Once in the library, where he'd entered, seen her reading, and immediately turned and left without a word. And once in the corridor, late at night, when she'd stepped out of her room for a moment and found him standing at the base of the stairs, looking up toward the 3rd floor with an expression of such raw anguish that Eleanor had retreated immediately, feeling as though she'd witnessed something too private to name. But it was the sounds that haunted her. The footsteps, the occasional cry in the night, quickly silenced. And once, heartbreakingly, the sound of a child laughing before it was abruptly cut off, as if someone had clapped a hand over a small mouth. Children, plural. How many? And why were they hidden? Eleanor began to piece together what she could from the servants' careful silences. The 3rd floor had been closed for 6 years, though Mrs. Dawson occasionally brought meals up on a tray. His Grace visited the 3rd floor every evening without fail, always alone, always for exactly 1 hour. No one from the village was ever permitted in the house. All deliveries were left at the gate. And most tellingly, when Eleanor had asked a young maid about the previous duchess, the girl had gone pale and said quickly, "There was no previous duchess, Your Grace," before hurrying away. No previous duchess. Which meant the children were illegitimate. The realization should have brought relief. This was scandal, yes, but not treason, not madness. Simply a nobleman's bastard children, hidden away from society's judgment. But something about it didn't fit. The fear in the servant's eyes was too real. Alexander's grief was profound. And the way he looked at that staircase, not with shame, but with something that looked unbearably like love. On the 15th night of her marriage, Eleanor made a decision. She waited until the house was silent, until Alexander's measured footsteps had carried him up to the 3rd floor and back down again, disappearing into the west wing, until even the servants had retired for the night. Then she lit a single candle, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, and climbed the stairs. The 3rd floor was dark and still. The corridor stretched before her, lined with closed doors. At the far end, a faint line of light showed beneath one door. Eleanor moved toward it, her heart hammering against her ribs. She raised her hand to knock. The door opened. Alexander stood there, his cravat loosened, his dark hair disheveled, and his expression one of absolute fury. "What?" he said, each word precise and deadly. "Are you doing here?" Eleanor forced herself not to step back. "I heard noises. I was concerned." Concerned. His eyes were ice. "Or curious? Does it matter?" "It matters," he said, "because you have violated the one rule I gave you. This floor is forbidden. The nursery is forbidden. You are to leave. Now." "I know you have children," Eleanor said quietly. The color drained from his face. "I've heard them," she continued. "I don't know why they're hidden, and I don't know why you married me when you already have." "You know nothing," Alexander interrupted, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "Nothing. And you will go back to your rooms, and you will never speak of this again. I'm your wife. You are a womb I purchased," he said brutally. "Nothing more. You have no rights here, no claims, no business asking questions. If you cannot accept that, I will have Pemberton draw up an annulment and you will leave in the morning with nothing. The words struck like physical blows. Eleanor stood perfectly still, refusing to let him see how much they hurt. Very well, Your Grace, she said, her voice steady. I will not disturb you again. She turned and walked back down the corridor, her candle casting long shadows. Behind her, she heard the door close. Then, so faint she almost missed it, the sound of Alexander Thorne's forehead hitting the wood with a soft, defeated thud. And Eleanor realized something that changed everything. He wasn't hiding the children because he didn't love them. He was hiding them because he loved them too much. 3 days passed in frozen silence. Eleanor kept to her rooms. Alexander disappeared into his study or rode out across the moors for hours at a time, returning only after dark. But on the 4th morning, everything changed. Eleanor woke to the sound of screaming. Not an adult scream, a child's. High and terrified and coming from the 3rd floor. She was out of bed and running before she'd even fully registered what she was doing. Her nightgown streaming behind her as she raced up the stairs. The door to the nursery stood open. Inside, chaos. A boy of perhaps 6 knelt on the floor, clutching his arm and sobbing. Beside him stood a girl, maybe 4, her face white with shock. Blood streaked the floorboards. And Alexander was on his knees beside the boy, his hands shaking as he tried to examine the injury. It's all right, he was saying, over and over, his voice cracking. It's all right, Thomas. Let me see. Let me. It hurts, Papa. The boy sobbed. It hurts. Eleanor didn't think. She simply moved. She knelt beside them, gently taking the boy's arm in her hands. The cut was deep but clean, a gash from what looked like a broken toy soldier. Shoo! She murmured, her voice calm. I know it hurts, sweetheart, but we need to clean it. Can you be very brave for me? The boy's tear-filled eyes, gray, exactly like Alexander's, fixed on her face. Who are you? He whispered. My name is Eleanor. She glanced at Alexander, who stared at her as if she'd appeared out of thin air. I'm here to help. She looked up at the little girl, who watched with wide, uncertain eyes. What's your name? Lily, the child whispered. Lily, I need you to fetch me clean clothes and water. Can you do that? You'll find them in the washroom, there, that door. Very quickly now. To her surprise, the girl obeyed immediately, running to get the supplies. Eleanor turned back to the boy. Thomas. This will sting a bit, but then it will feel better. I promise. She worked quickly and efficiently, cleaning the wound, binding it with strips of clean linen. The boy whimpered but didn't pull away, his small hand gripping hers tightly. There, she said softly when it was done. All better. You were very brave. Like a soldier? Thomas asked, his voice still shaky. Like the bravest soldier in all of England. The smallest smile touched his tear-stained face. Eleanor looked up at Alexander. He hadn't moved. He knelt there on the nursery floor, staring at her as if she were a ghost, or a miracle, or something he couldn't quite believe was real. Your Grace, she said quietly, perhaps we should talk. They sent the children to bed, though bed was generous for the sparse nursery. The room was clean but sparse, with 2 small cots, a few worn toys, and very little else. No pictures on the walls. No rugs on the floors. As if someone had tried to erase all evidence of life while still keeping the children alive. Alexander led Eleanor down to his study in silence. He poured himself a drink with shaking hands, downed it in one swallow, then poured another. They're mine, he said finally, not looking at her. Thomas is 6. Lily is 4. Their mother. He stopped. Eleanor waited. Their mother was my wife, he said. The words dragged out like broken glass. Legally, secretly married. Her name was Catherine. She was the daughter of a country vicar. No dowry, no connections. My father would have disinherited me if he'd known. So you married in secret? Yes. I was 23, arrogant, certain I could manage it all. We were happy for 3 years. Catherine became pregnant with Thomas. Then, 6 months after Lily was born, His voice broke. There was a fire. Eleanor's breath caught. She died trying to save them, Alexander continued. The servant's wing. An overturned lamp. Catherine got the children out. But she... He stopped, his jaw working. She died 3 days later. Burns, smoke in her lungs. She held on long enough to make me promise, to keep them safe. To keep them hidden until I could find a way to make it right. Hidden, Eleanor repeated. Why? Because they're bastards in the eyes of the law, Alexander said bitterly. The marriage was never recorded. Catherine's father performed the ceremony, but he died before it could be registered. Without proof, Thomas has no claim to the title. And my uncle, his hands clenched. My uncle would destroy them if he knew. He's next in line after me. He's been waiting for me to die without an heir for 10 years. The pieces fell into place. So you need a legitimate heir, Eleanor said slowly. A child whose birth can't be questioned. And once you have one, I can bring Thomas and Lily out of hiding, Alexander finished. I can claim them as wards, distant relatives, anything. I can give them a life. But until then, if anyone knows they exist, my uncle will find a way to use them against me. He's done it before, threatened exposure, threatened worse. So I've kept them here, in secret, away from everyone. He finally looked at her. Including you. Eleanor sank into a chair, her mind reeling. You married me, she said. Not for convenience, but to protect them. Yes. And when I asked about the nursery, I thought you'd discovered them, Alexander said. I thought you'd threaten to expose them, demand more money, use them as leverage. So I said the cruelest things I could think of to drive you away. He closed his eyes. I am sorry for that. Eleanor sat in silence for a long moment. Why didn't you tell me? She asked finally. Why not trust me from the beginning? Because I don't trust anyone, Alexander said simply. I haven't, not since Catherine died. Not since I realized how fragile everything is, how easily the people I love can be taken from me. Trust is a luxury I can't afford. So you've kept them locked away, Eleanor said. For 6 years. Alone, frightened, barely seeing the light of day. It's temporary, Alexander interrupted, his voice rising. As soon as you provide an heir, as soon as Thomas's claim is secure. Temporary? Eleanor stood, anger flooding through her. Your Grace, Lily doesn't remember a time before this prison. Thomas thinks hiding is normal. They have no nurse, no tutor, no proper care. I care for them, Alexander said fiercely. Every night. I read to them, play with them, teach them. For 1 hour, Eleanor said. 1 hour out of every day, and the rest of the time they're alone. That's not protection. That's cruelty. Don't you dare, Alexander said, his voice deadly quiet. Don't you dare judge me for trying to keep them alive. I'm not judging you for protecting them, Eleanor interrupted. I'm judging you for thinking that survival is the same as living. The silence that followed was absolute. Alexander stared at her, something cracking behind his eyes. What would you have me do? He asked finally, his voice raw. Risk them? Let them be seen. Let my uncle discover them. Let them be destroyed. Eleanor took a breath. Let me help you, she said quietly. Let me care for them properly. Let me give them what they need, not just survival but childhood. Safety, yes, but also joy. Your children are not chess pieces to be hidden until the game is won. They're children, and they're terrified, and they need more than you can give them alone. Alexander looked away, his jaw tight. I don't need your help. Yes, Eleanor said gently. You do. For a long moment he said nothing. Then finally he spoke. If you betray them, he said, his voice shaking. If you do anything, say anything that puts them at risk. I won't, Eleanor said. I swear it. His eyes searched hers, looking for the lie, the deception, the inevitable betrayal. He found none. 1 month, he said finally. You may see them during the day. You may help with their care. But no one else can know. Not the servants, not anyone. And if at any point I believe you've become a danger to them, you'll have every right to remove me, Eleanor finished. I understand. Alexander nodded slowly. Then we have an agreement. Eleanor extended her hand. After a moment, Alexander took it. His hand was cold, his grip desperate. And Eleanor realized with sudden clarity that this proud, broken man had been alone for far too long. The attack. The month that followed changed everything. Eleanor spent her days in the forbidden nursery, and with each hour, the children blossomed like flowers finally given light. Thomas was shy at first, watching her with wary gray eyes so like his father's. But when she brought him books, real books, not the few battered volumes Alexander had managed to smuggle upstairs, his whole face transformed. Stories, he breathed, running his small hands over the leather covers. Real stories. As many as you want, Eleanor promised. And I'll teach you to read them yourself if you'd like. Lily was easier to win over. She simply climbed into Eleanor's lap the second day, pressed her face against Eleanor's shoulder, and whispered, "You smell nice, like flowers." Eleanor's heart broke a little. "When was the last time you were outside?" she asked carefully. "I don't remember," Lily said. "Papa says it's not safe." It wasn't safe. Eleanor knew that. But as she looked around the bare nursery, at the children who'd spent years in this gilded cage, she made a decision. That afternoon, she found Alexander in his study. "I want to take the children into the garden," she said without preamble. He looked up sharply. "Absolutely not. They need fresh air. They need sunlight. Thomas is pale as a ghost, and Lily—" "I said no," Alexander interrupted. "It's too dangerous. If anyone sees them, then we'll use the walled garden," Eleanor said. "The one behind the west wing that's completely hidden from view. No servants, no visitors. Just you, me, and the children. Please." Alexander stared at her for a long moment. "This is a mistake," he said finally. "Perhaps. But it's one I'm willing to make." Something shifted in his expression. "1 hour," he said. "At dawn, before the servants wake. And I'll be there the entire time." Eleanor nodded. "Thank you." That first morning, when Thomas and Lily stepped out into the garden, they froze. The sun was just rising, painting everything gold and rose. Frost sparkled on the grass. Birds sang in the trees. Lily looked up at Eleanor with enormous eyes. "It's so big," she whispered. "It's the world," Eleanor said softly. "And it's yours." The children ran. They laughed. They chased each other through the paths, their small voices echoing off the stone walls. And Alexander stood beneath the oak tree, watching them with an expression of such profound grief and joy tangled together that Eleanor had to look away. "This is what I've stolen from them," he said quietly when she approached. 6 years of this. "You protected them," Eleanor said. "Now you're giving them back their childhood. That's not theft. That's love." He looked at her then, really looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. "You're not what I expected," he said. "Neither are you." A smile ghosted across his face. Brief but real. "They adore you, you know," he said. "Thomas asked me last night if you were staying forever." Eleanor's breath caught. "What did you tell him?" "That I didn't know," Alexander said honestly. "That our arrangement was complicated. It doesn't have to be." He studied her face. "You're suggesting we make this real." "I'm suggesting," Eleanor said carefully, "that we're already a family. We're just too afraid to admit it." Alexander turned away, his jaw tight. "I made that mistake once before," he said. "With Catherine. I let myself believe in forever. And forever lasted 3 years before it all burned down. So you'll live in fear for the rest of your life? Keep everyone at arm's length? Deny yourself happiness because you're terrified of losing it?" "Yes," Alexander said simply. "Because that pain nearly destroyed me. I cannot survive it again." Eleanor wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that love was worth the risk, that hiding was no way to live. But she also understood, with painful clarity, that Alexander Thorne's heart was a fortress, and she had no right to demand entry just because she'd found herself, against all logic and reason, beginning to care. The garden visits became routine. Every morning at dawn, just the four of them, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, something changed. Alexander began staying after the hour was up, lingering in the garden while the children played. He taught Thomas to skip stones across the fountain. He wove flower crowns for Lily's hair, and he talked to Eleanor about Catherine, about the fire, about the years of grief and guilt that had hardened him into someone who couldn't let anyone close. "I'm not a good man," he said one morning as they watched the children chase butterflies. "I've been cruel to you, cold. I've treated you like a transaction when you've shown my children nothing but kindness." "You've been afraid," Eleanor said. "That's not the same as cruel, isn't it?" She turned to face him. "Alexander, you've spent 6 years protecting your children at the cost of your own life. You haven't attended Parliament. You've refused all social engagements. You've made yourself a recluse to keep them safe. That's not cruelty. That's a sacrifice. Or cowardice," he said quietly. "Hiding rather than fighting." "You're fighting now," Eleanor pointed out. "Every day. Every moment you spend loving them despite the risk." He looked at her with something raw and vulnerable in his eyes. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "How to be a husband. How to trust someone new. How to let you into the parts of my life I've kept closed for so long." "Then don't," Eleanor said softly. "Don't force it. Just let it happen. Let us be what we are, two people trying to protect the same children. The rest will come or it won't. But either way, we'll manage." Alexander reached out, almost hesitantly, and took her hand. "You terrify me," he said. "Good," Eleanor replied. "You should be terrified. I'm about to dismantle every wall you've built and make you feel things again." A genuine laugh escaped him, surprised and rusty with disuse. "God help me," he said. "I think you actually will." But then, on a cold February morning 6 weeks after Eleanor had arrived at Ashworth Hall, everything fell apart. It started with a letter. Alexander received it at breakfast. Eleanor saw his face go pale as he read, and saw his hands begin to shake. "What is it?" she asked. "My uncle," he said, his voice hollow. "He's coming here. Tomorrow." The room seemed to tilt. "Can you refuse him?" "No. He's family. If I turn him away, it will raise suspicions." Alexander looked up, his eyes desperate. "Eleanor, he can't know about the children. If he discovers them, we'll hide them," Eleanor said immediately. "The way you've been doing it for years. One day. We can manage one day." "He's bringing guests," Alexander said. "A hunting party. 10 men, possibly more. They'll be here for 3 days. 3 days of pretending the nursery was empty. 3 days of silence, of Thomas and Lily locked away without even their morning garden visits. 3 days of the children wondering why their father had disappeared, why Eleanor had abandoned them. "We'll manage," Eleanor said again, more firmly. "We have to." Lord Edmund Thorne arrived the next afternoon with the force of a winter storm. He was tall, silver-haired, handsome in a cold, precise way. His eyes, the same gray as Alexander's but infinitely crueler, swept over Ashworth Hall with the proprietary air of a man already imagining it as his own. "Nephew," he said, embracing Alexander with false warmth. "How wonderful to see you. And this must be the new Duchess. How unexpected." Eleanor curtsied, feeling those cold eyes assess and dismiss her in one sweep. "My uncle, Lord Edmund Thorne," Alexander said, his voice carefully neutral. "And his companions." The hunting party filled the house with noise and chaos. Men in riding boots tramping through halls that had been silent for years. Loud voices, laughter, the clatter of gun cases and the baying of hounds. Eleanor retreated to her room as soon as propriety allowed. But she couldn't stop thinking about the nursery 3 floors above. About Thomas and Lily, silent and frightened, wondering why no one came. That evening at dinner, Lord Edmund studied Alexander with eyes that saw too much. "You've become quite the hermit, Alexander," he said. "Shut yourself away in this tomb. It's unnatural for a man your age." "I prefer solitude," Alexander replied evenly. "Clearly, though I notice you've finally taken a wife." Edmund's gaze slid to Eleanor. "Tell me, my dear, what induced you to marry into such a gloomy situation?" "I found His Grace's company preferable to alternatives," Eleanor said coolly. "Did you?" Edmund smiled. "How refreshing. Though I wonder, have you found much company here? The house seems remarkably empty. No servants to speak of. No life." "We prefer a small household," Alexander said. "Small indeed." Edmund leaned back, swirling his wine. "In fact, I was just telling Ashford here that Ashworth Hall seems more like a mausoleum than a residence. One wonders what you're protecting. Or hiding." The words landed like stones into still water. "I'm hiding nothing," Alexander said. "No?" Edmund's smile widened. "Then you won't mind if we explore a bit tomorrow. The old nursery wing, for instance. I have fond memories of playing there as a child." Eleanor felt her blood run cold. "The nursery has been closed for years," Alexander said carefully. "There's nothing there but dust and old furniture." "Then there's no harm in visiting it, is there?" Edmund's eyes gleamed. For old time's sake. Alexander couldn't refuse without raising more suspicion. "Of course. Though I assure you, you'll find it disappointingly dull." "We'll see." That night, Eleanor found Alexander pacing his study like a caged animal. "He knows," Alexander said. "Somehow he knows." "You don't know that." "Yes, I do. You saw the way he looked at me. He's been suspicious for years, and now he's going to search until he finds proof." His hands clenched into fists. "If he discovers them, Eleanor, if he reveals their existence to Parliament, they'll be taken from me. Thomas will have no claim to the title. Lily will be branded a bastard. They'll be destroyed, and there's nothing I can do to stop it." Eleanor crossed to him, taking his face in her hands. "Then we move them," she said. "Tonight, before dawn. We take them to the gatehouse or the stables, anywhere Edmund won't think to look. Just for 3 days. Just until he's gone. The stables are too risky. Too many grooms. And the gatehouse." "Then the dower house," Eleanor interrupted. "It's been empty for years, completely isolated. We can move them in darkness, bring them back when it's safe." Alexander stared at her. "That could work, if we're careful. If no one sees, then we'll be careful." He pulled her close, sudden and desperate, burying his face in her hair. "How did I survive before you?" he whispered. Eleanor held him tightly. "You didn't. You just existed." They moved the children at 3 in the morning. Thomas and Lily woke confused and frightened, but Alexander soothed them with whispered promises. Eleanor bundled them in warm cloaks and carried Lily while Alexander carried Thomas. The dower house was a mile through the woods, accessed by a hidden path. It was bitterly cold, their breath misting in the moonlight. They were almost there when Lily stirred in Eleanor's arms. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I know, sweetheart," Eleanor murmured. "But Papa and I are here. We won't let anything happen to you. Promise." "I promise." The dower house was cold and dusty, but Eleanor and Alexander worked quickly to make one room habitable. Blankets, food, water, books for Thomas, toys for Lily. "We'll come back tonight," Alexander told them, "after the hunting party has retired. But during the day you must be very quiet, very still. Can you do that?" Thomas nodded gravely. "We're good at being quiet, Papa." The words broke something in Alexander's chest. "I know you are," he said hoarsely. "I'm so sorry." Eleanor knelt beside them. "This is the last time," she said firmly. "After this, we'll find a better way. I promise you, both of you. This is the last time you'll have to hide." She looked at Alexander as she said it, and he understood. Whatever happened, they couldn't go on like this. The children deserved more, deserved better, deserved freedom even if it meant risk. They left as dawn was breaking, slipping back through the woods to Ashworth Hall. They separated at the house. Alexander to his wing, Eleanor to hers. Neither of them slept. Lord Edmund's search of the nursery was thorough and deliberate. Eleanor and Alexander stood in the doorway, watching as he examined every corner, opened every wardrobe, pulled back every dusty sheet. "Just as I remembered," Edmund said. "Empty. Abandoned." He turned to Alexander. "Though I notice the dust is remarkably light in places. As if someone has been here recently." "The servants clean occasionally," Alexander said. "Do they?" Edmund crossed to the window. "Strange. I asked Mrs. Dawson about this wing, and she said it's been locked for years. Forbidden, in fact." Alexander said nothing. Edmund smiled. "You're hiding something, nephew. I don't know what yet, but I will find out. And when I do—" He moved toward the door, pausing beside Eleanor. "I hope you know what you've married into, Your Grace. A house of secrets. A man who trusts no one. How lonely that must be." After he left, Eleanor turned to Alexander. "He's not going to stop," she said quietly. "I know. Then what do we do?" Alexander looked at her with eyes full of a terrible, desperate resolve. "We survive," he said. "The way we always have." The collapse. The next morning dawned gray and bitter, with the kind of cold that sank into bones and refused to leave. The hunting party prepared to ride out at first light. Eleanor watched from her window as the men gathered in the courtyard, their breath misting, hounds circling. Alexander stood among them, his face carefully blank. Lord Edmund appeared last, dressed in impeccable hunting attire. He caught sight of Eleanor at the window and raised his hand in a mocking salute. She stepped back, her stomach tight with unease. The men rode out. The house fell silent. Eleanor waited an hour, then two. At noon, when Mrs. Dawson was occupied supervising the preparation of the evening's meal, Eleanor slipped out through the garden door and made her way toward the woods. She had to check on the children. "I had to make sure they were safe, warm, and still hidden." Alexander had been too distracted this morning to visit them, and Eleanor couldn't bear the thought of Thomas and Lily alone and frightened in that cold house. The path through the woods was overgrown, barely visible. Eleanor picked her way carefully, her cloak catching on brambles. She was halfway there when she heard it. Hoofbeats. Not the distant sound of the hunting party, but close. Dangerously close. Eleanor froze behind an old oak tree, her heart hammering. Through the trees she saw them. 3 men on horseback, moving slowly along the perimeter of the estate. Not hunting, searching. And leading them was Lord Edmund. "The dower house is this way," he was saying. "I'd forgotten it even existed. Been empty for years, hasn't it?" "Since the old Duke died," another man replied. "Why search there?" "Because," Edmund said with cold satisfaction, "my nephew has been acting like a man with something to hide, and men who hide things tend to hide them in forgotten places." Eleanor's blood turned to ice. They were going to find the children. She didn't think so. She simply ran. She crashed through the woods, branches tearing at her dress, her breath burning in her lungs. She had to get there first. Had to warn them, hide them, something. She burst into the dower house, gasping. "Thomas! Lily!" They appeared from the makeshift bedroom, wide-eyed. "Eleanor," Thomas said. "What's wrong?" "We have to go," Eleanor said. "Now. Right now." "But Papa said." "I know what Papa said. But it's not safe anymore. Come with me. Quickly." She heard the hoofbeats in the distance. Getting closer. There was no time to run. The men would see them, would catch them. Eleanor looked around desperately. The house had no back door, no place to hide that wouldn't be discovered in seconds, except the cellar. "This way," she said, pulling the children toward the narrow door at the back of the kitchen. "Down here. Don't make a sound. No matter what you hear." She got them down the stairs into the cold, dark cellar just as the front door of the dower house crashed open. "Told you, Edmund, there's nothing here," one of the men was saying. "Then we'll make certain of it," Lord Edmund replied. Eleanor closed the cellar door as quietly as she could, then turned and positioned herself on the stairs, blocking the children from view. If anyone opened that door, they would see her first. Only her. Above, she heard footsteps. Furniture being overturned. Wardrobes opened. "What exactly are we looking for?" someone asked. "Evidence," Edmund said. "My nephew has been remarkably secretive for years. I want to know why." "You think he's hiding something illegal?" "I think he's hiding something he doesn't want me to find, which means it's worth finding." The footsteps came closer. Closer. The cellar door rattled. Behind her, Eleanor felt Thomas press against her back. Lily's small hand clutched her skirt. The door opened. Light flooded down the stairs. Lord Edmund stood at the top, silhouetted against the light. "Well, well," he said softly. "What have we here?" Eleanor stood, forcing herself between Edmund and the children. "Nothing that concerns you, Lord Edmund." "The new Duchess," Edmund said, his smile widening. "How curious. What brings you to an abandoned dower house, hiding in a cellar like a thief?" "I was taking a walk," Eleanor said. "I heard riders and thought." "You thought you'd hide in a dark cellar?" Edmund descended one step. "Two. How remarkably unconvincing." "Your Grace," one of the other men called from above. "There are children's things here. Toys. Blankets." Edmund's eyes gleamed. "Children's things. And a duchess in a cellar. Tell me, my dear, what exactly has my nephew been hiding?" Eleanor lifted her chin. "Nothing." "No?" Edmund descended another step. Now he was close enough to see past her. Close enough to see. Thomas stepped forward, placing himself between Eleanor and his uncle. "Leave her alone," the boy said, his voice high but steady. "She hasn't done anything wrong." The silence that followed was absolute. Edmund stared at Thomas, at his gray eyes, his dark hair, the unmistakable resemblance to Alexander Thorne. "Dear God," Edmund breathed. "It's true." "Please," Eleanor said desperately. "They're just children. Just children." Edmund laughed, cold and triumphant. "These are Alexander's bastards. The heirs he's been hiding for years." He looked at Thomas with cruel satisfaction. "What's your name, boy?" Thomas said nothing. "Thomas," Lily whispered from the shadows. "His name is Thomas." Edmund's eyes found her too. Two children. Two illegitimate heirs. "This is better than I'd hoped," he said. "Alexander married you to produce a legitimate heir, didn't he? To protect these mistakes. But it's too late. I have witnesses. Proof. By tomorrow, all of London will know." "You will do nothing," Eleanor said, her voice shaking with fury. "You will leave these children alone." "Or what?" Edmund asked. "You'll stop me? You, a nobody from Bath with no family, no connections, no power whatsoever." He leaned in close. "You're nothing, Your Grace. And now that I know the truth, so is my nephew." He turned to leave. Eleanor didn't think. She simply grabbed his arm. "Wait!" Edmund shoved her backward. It wasn't hard. Barely more than a dismissive push. But Eleanor was at the top of the cellar stairs, and there was nowhere to go but down. She felt herself falling. Felt the stone steps rushing up to meet her. Heard Thomas scream. Then impact. Pain. Darkness. Eleanor opened her eyes to find herself lying at the bottom of the cellar stairs. Her head ringing, her vision blurred. She tried to move and gasped. Her left leg, something was wrong. She couldn't feel it properly. Couldn't move it. "Eleanor." Thomas was beside her, his face white with terror. "Eleanor, wake up." "I'm awake," she managed. "I'm." Pain lanced through her side. She looked down and saw blood. Not much, but enough to be frightening. The fall had opened a gash on her temple. Above, she heard shouting. Edmund's voice, sharp and panicked. "She fell. I barely touched her. You pushed her down the stairs." Another man, horrified. "It was an accident. An accident with witnesses." "Christ, Edmund, if she dies." "She won't die. She's fine. Look, she's moving." But Eleanor wasn't fine. Her head felt strange, disconnected. The pain in her leg was becoming distant, which she knew wasn't good. Thomas was crying. Lily clung to Eleanor's hand. "Don't leave us," Lily whispered. "Please don't leave us." Eleanor tried to speak, to reassure them, but the darkness was creeping back in. The last thing she heard before unconsciousness took her was the sound of hoofbeats. Frantic hoofbeats, thundering closer. And then Alexander's voice, broken and desperate. "Eleanor." Alexander had known something was wrong the moment he'd returned to the house and found Eleanor gone. Mrs. Dawson said she'd gone for a walk. But Eleanor didn't take walks without telling him. Not anymore. Not when the children were hidden and the house was full of enemies. He'd saddled his horse and ridden toward the Dower house, some instinct pulling him there. And then he'd seen the other horses, Edmund's horses. He'd pushed his mount harder, fear flooding his veins. He'd crashed through the door to find Edmund standing at the top of the cellar stairs, looking down at something below with an expression caught between triumph and horror. "What have you done?" Alexander had demanded. Edmund stepped aside wordlessly. Alexander looked down. Eleanor lay crumpled at the bottom of the stairs, blood on her face, his children kneeling beside her. The world stopped. "It was an accident," Edmund was saying. "She grabbed me, lost her balance." Alexander didn't hear him. He was already moving, taking the stairs 3 at a time, dropping to his knees beside Eleanor. "Eleanor," he said, his voice shaking. "Eleanor, can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused, distant. "Alexander," she whispered. "The children. They're safe. They're here. Don't try to move." "I had to protect them," she said, her words slurring slightly. "He was going to tell me. He was going to take them. Shoo, it's all right. You did perfectly. You protected them. His voice broke. "Eleanor, stay with me. Please." Her hand found his. "Don't let him take them." "I won't. I swear to you I won't." Her eyes closed. "No," Alexander said desperately. "No, Eleanor. Open your eyes. Look at me. You can't leave. I need you. The children need you." He couldn't finish. Couldn't say what he'd only just realized was true. That he loved her. That he'd fallen in love with his practical, unsentimental wife who'd somehow dismantled every wall he'd built and made him feel again. And now she was dying in his arms because she'd tried to protect his children from his mistakes. "Get a doctor," he said to the men standing frozen at the top of the stairs. "Now. Move." They scattered. Alexander gathered Eleanor into his arms as carefully as he could, mindful of her leg, the blood. Thomas and Lily clung to him, both crying. "Is she going to die?" Thomas asked, his voice breaking. "No," Alexander said fiercely. "No, she's not. I won't let her." He carried Eleanor out of the cellar, through the Dower house, into the cold February air. And as he held her against his chest, feeling her heart beat weakly against his own, Alexander Thorne made a vow. If Eleanor survived this, when she survived this, he would never hide again. Never hold back. Never let fear keep him from the people he loved. He would burn down the world before he lost her. After the fall, Eleanor woke to candlelight and pain. The pain was immediate. A throbbing in her head, a sharp ache in her leg, a general soreness that seemed to radiate from everywhere at once. The candlelight was softer, golden, familiar. She was in her room at Ashworth Hall, in her bed, and sitting beside her, his head bowed, his hand clutching hers as if it were the only thing keeping him tethered to earth, was Alexander. "Alexander," she whispered. His head snapped up. For a moment he simply stared at her as if she were a ghost. Then something broke in his face. "You're awake," he said, his voice hoarse. "Thank God you're awake." "How long?" 3 days, he said. "You've been unconscious for 3 days. The doctor said." He stopped, his jaw working. "He said it could have been much worse. Concussion, broken leg, severe bruising, but no permanent damage. You're going to be all right." Eleanor tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. "Don't," Alexander said quickly, pressing her gently back down. Don't move. You need to rest. The children, Eleanor said urgently. Thomas and Lily, are they? They're safe, Alexander said. They're upstairs, probably driving Mrs. Dawson to distraction. They've been asking about you constantly. His throat worked. They think you're a hero. I'm not. You are, Alexander interrupted. You threw yourself between them and Edmund. You protected them even though it meant putting yourself in danger. Eleanor, you could have died. But I didn't. But you could have. His hand tightened on hers. And it would have been my fault. My secrets, my fear, my inability to trust anyone. All of it led to you lying broken at the bottom of those stairs. Eleanor studied his face. He looked terrible. Unshaven, hollow-eyed, as if he hadn't slept in days. What happened to Edmund? She asked. Something hard entered Alexander's expression. He's gone. And he won't be returning. Alexander. He pushed you down a flight of stairs in front of witnesses, Alexander said flatly. Witnesses who corroborated that he was attempting to expose and possibly harm my children. I had a choice. I could let him spread his poison through society, or I could make him an offer he couldn't refuse. What kind of offer? The kind where I agreed not to bring charges of assault against him, and in exchange, he signed a legal document relinquishing all claims to the Ashworth title and agreeing never to speak of what he saw at the Dower House. Alexander's smile was cold. I also ensured that certain financial irregularities of his came to light. He's currently residing in Italy, where he'll remain indefinitely. You destroyed him. I protected my family, Alexander corrected. There's a difference. Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. What happens now? She asked softly. With Thomas and Lily. With us. Alexander was quiet for a moment. Then he stood, crossed to the window, and stared out at the winter landscape. I've been thinking about that, he said finally. I've spent 6 years hiding my children because I was afraid of losing them. But the truth is, I've been losing them all along. Losing them to fear, to silence, to the prison I built to keep them safe. He turned back to face her. No more, he said. No more hiding. I'm bringing them out. Publicly. I'll claim them as wards. Distant relatives orphaned in the fire that killed their mother. Society will gossip, but they gossip about everything. Let them. And Thomas's claim to the title? Without proof of my marriage to Catherine, Thomas has no legal claim, Alexander said. Which means our son, the son you and I will have together, will be my heir. But Thomas and Lily will be raised as part of this family. Not hidden. Not ashamed. Loved. Our son. Eleanor's breath caught. You still want that? She asked. The heir? The arrangement. Alexander crossed back to her, kneeling beside the bed so they were eye to eye. I don't want an arrangement, he said quietly. I want a marriage. A real one. With you. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. Alexander. I fell in love with you, he said. Somewhere between the garden visits and the midnight conversations. Between watching you read to my children and seeing you stand up to my uncle. I fell in love with you, Eleanor, and I'm terrified because the last time I loved someone, I lost them. But I'm more terrified of living the rest of my life without you. A tear slipped down Eleanor's cheek. I love you too, she whispered. I think I have since the moment I saw you on your knees in that nursery, trying so hard to be everything for those children. Alexander leaned forward, pressing his forehead against hers. Then marry me, he said. Again. Properly this time. Not a transaction. Not an arrangement. Marry me because you want to. Because we're choosing each other. We're already married. Then let me vow it again, he said. Let me promise you everything I should have promised the first time. Love, partnership, trust. A life built on truth instead of fear. Eleanor cupped his face in her hands. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll marry you. Again and again, as many times as you need to hear it. He kissed her then, gentle because she was still healing, but deep enough to feel like a promise. When they broke apart, both were crying. The children should meet you properly, Alexander said. Not as the woman helping care for them, but as their mother. Stepmother, Eleanor corrected softly. No, Alexander said firmly. Mother. Catherine will always be the woman who gave them life. But you're the one who's going to teach them how to live. Thomas and Lily were permitted to visit that evening. They crept into the room cautiously, as if Eleanor might break. Mrs. Dawson hovered in the doorway, but Alexander waved her away. It's all right, he said. We're family now. Thomas approached first, his gray eyes solemn. Are you all right? He asked. I'm all right, Eleanor assured him. I'll be up and walking in a few weeks. You saved us, Thomas said. Uncle Edmund wanted to hurt us, but you stopped him. Of course I did, Eleanor said gently. That's what mothers do. Thomas's eyes widened. You're our mother now? Eleanor glanced at Alexander, who nodded encouragingly. If you'd like me to be, she said carefully. I know you had a mother before. Mama Catherine, Lily said, climbing onto the bed beside Eleanor. We remember her a little. She was beautiful. She was... Alexander agreed, his voice thick. But Papa says you're our mother now, Thomas said. And that we don't have to hide anymore. That's right, Alexander said. No more hiding. No more secrets. We're going to live like a proper family. Will we go outside? Lily asked hopefully. In the daytime? With other people? Yes, Eleanor said, smiling despite her tears. We'll go outside. We'll go to the village. We'll have picnics and riding lessons and everything you've been missing. Lily threw her small arms around Eleanor's neck. I love you, Mama. The word Mama hit Eleanor like a physical force. She held the little girl close, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling her small heartbeat. I love you too, darling, she whispered. Both of you. So much. Thomas climbed onto the bed on her other side, and Alexander joined them, careful not to jostle Eleanor's injuries. They stayed like that for a long time. Family. Not perfect. Not uncomplicated. But real. And for the first time in 6 years, Alexander Thorne let himself believe in forever again. 6 months later, spring came to Ashworth Hall like a benediction. The gardens exploded with color. The moors turned green and gold. The windows were thrown open, and for the first time in years, the house filled with light and laughter. Thomas and Lily attended the village school now. They had friends. They played in the garden without fear. They called Eleanor Mama and Alexander Papa, and knew no difference between the love they received from each. Eleanor walked the grounds with only a slight limp. The doctor said it would fade in time. She'd started a small school on the estate for children from the village, teaching reading and numbers in the old conservatory. And Alexander was a different man. He smiled now, laughed, attended dinners in the village and invited neighbors to dine at the hall. He held Eleanor's hand in public, kissed her in the garden when he thought no one was watching, and made no secret of his devotion to his family. The ton gossiped, of course, about the mysterious words, about the reclusive duke who'd suddenly emerged from isolation, about the nobody from Bath who'd somehow tamed the untamable Duke of Ashworth. Let them gossip. Eleanor and Alexander had something more valuable than reputation. They had the truth. One evening in late April, Alexander found Eleanor in the garden, watching Thomas teach Lily how to catch fireflies. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. Happy? He murmured. Impossibly, Eleanor said, leaning back against him. You, more than I have any right to be. They stood in comfortable silence, watching their children play. I have news, Eleanor said softly. What kind of news? She turned in his arms, took his hand, and placed it gently on her stomach. The kind that means you're going to be a father again. Alexander went perfectly still. Eleanor, he breathed. Are you? Yes, she said, smiling. The doctor confirmed it this morning. He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you for giving me back my life, for teaching me how to love again, for, his voice broke, for everything. Thank you for letting me, Eleanor replied. for trusting me with your children, with your heart. Always, Alexander said, for the rest of our lives. Always. From the garden, Lily's voice rang out. Papa, Mama, come see. Thomas caught the biggest firefly. They went, hand in hand, toward the light and laughter, toward the family they'd built from broken pieces, toward the future they'd choose together every single day. And Ashworth Hall, which had been silent and cold for so long, finally felt like home. 10 years later, the christening of Lady Catherine Thorne was attended by half the county. Eleanor stood in the drawing room of Ashworth Hall, now bright and warm and filled with flowers, holding her youngest daughter. Around her, chaos reigned in the most wonderful way. Thomas, now 16 and tall as his father, was arguing good-naturedly with his tutor about classical literature. Lily, 14 and beautiful, played the piano for a group of admiring young gentlemen. And their other children, James, 8 and little Alexander, 5, chased each other through the garden visible through the open doors. Alexander appeared at Eleanor's side, slipping an arm around her waist. Happy? He asked, the question that had become their tradition. Impossibly, Eleanor replied. You, beyond words. They watched their family, built from fear and transformed by love. And Eleanor remembered the cold woman who'd arrived at this house 10 years ago, the woman who'd expected nothing and found everything. Do you ever regret it? Alexander asked softly, saying yes? Coming here, Eleanor turned to face him, this man who'd given her children to love, a purpose to fulfill, and a devotion that never wavered. Not for a single moment, she said, and she meant it, because sometimes the most unconventional beginnings lead to the most extraordinary loves. And sometimes, just sometimes, the Duke who swears he wants no wife, only an heir, discovers that what he needed all along was a woman brave enough to collapse protecting his hidden children, and in doing so save them all.